Welcome back to Video Production on a Budget for Churches. This lesson is all about frame rates and which one is best for you. Frame rates are a crucial aspect of video production that can significantly impact the look and feel of your video. But what exactly are frame rates? You're probably asking me that. Possibly. That's why you're here. Frame rates refer to the number of images or frames displayed per second in a video. Different frame rates can create different viewing experiences. For example, 24 frames per second, or 24 FPS, is often used in cinema for a dramatic and cinematic look. On the other hand, 30 frames per second is the standard for television, while 60 frames per second provides a smooth motion ideal for sports broadcasts. Also, you've got one more. There's 120 frames per second and above. These high frame rates are used for slow motion video. They capture a lot of detail and motion, allowing you to slow down the footage in post-production for dramatic effect. If you're planning to include slow motion shots in your video, you'll want to shoot at a high frame rate like 120 frames per second or higher. Usually you can take 60 frames per second and in post slow it down to 24 to 30 frames per second to get a slow motion effect just as easily. What I'm shooting in right now is 24 frames per second. You can see in the motion blur, it's motiony, it's blurry, So in 30 frames per second, that's what you're going to be seeing in television shows like on CBS or ABC. Those are shot in 30 frames per second. And on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon, those are shot in 24 frames per second because they're more cinematic. Anything that is like a sitcom or a drama that you see on like CSI or FBI or NCIS, that's all shot in 30 frames per second. So basically what you're looking for is what is your camera going to be set up in when you set it up and start filming? It's usually going to be set up in, if you're gonna have a cinema camera, it's going to be set up in 24 frames out of the box. If you use cell phone, it's going to shoot 30 frames per second. You need to tell it to shoot in 24 to get that shot, and then if you go into the slow motion mode, it'll be 120. It will be 120 frames per second. Granted, I would say that choosing the right frame rate depends on several factors, including the amount of motion in your video, the lighting conditions, and the desired look of your video. It's really important to experiment with different frame rates to see which one best suits your video production needs. Again, usually I suggest like 24 frames per second. If it's a narrative style, I would, stick to 24 frames per second. It's going to look good. If you want a cinematic look, 24 frames per second. If you don't really mind or care about if it's cinematic or not, shoot 30. That's what's going to be native on your iPhone. It's just going to shoot 30 frames per second. So I encourage you to take your camera and experiment with shooting in different frame rates. And then notice how each frame rate affects the motion and overall look of your video. Remember, there's really no one-size-fits-all when it comes to frame rates. It's all about understanding your vision for the video and using the frame rate that helps tell your story and convey that vision that you had in the leadership meeting. I use between 24 frames per second and 60 frames per second. If I'm out shooting, doing videography for a client, I'll just shoot it in 60 frames per second because I'll want to go and cut it in half to get some slow motion, just to kind of help tell the story and kind of stretch out some shots. Usually, if you're going to be doing like sermon bumpers and things of that nature, shooting 24 frames per second because that's more cinematic, and shooting 60 to get some slow motion. That's what I recommend. Now, I will say, if you shoot in a higher frame rate, you will lose light. Yeah, so to get higher frame rates, the shutter, the thing when you take photos with a DSLR, that click noise, that's actually the shutter covering the sensor and bringing it back up. So that's what the shutter does. It blocks the sensor and comes back up. So if you want to get 24 frames per second, you'll want to think about the 180-degree rule. So you're going to double your frame rate. So 24, you're going to set your shutter to 48 frames per second. The lower your shutter speed, the more dreamy it's going to look, the more light it's going to let into the camera, which will cause things to bloom and look weird if you're not wanting that look. I implore you to take your camera outside, take your camera to your studio, mess around with a couple of your friends, start playing around with your frame rates. Okay, again. There is no one size fits all. It's whatever it fits the vision and whatever it fits the story. Okay, so if you're looking for a slower motion of just like someone's walking out the door and you want them to go slowly, slowly, you're gonna shoot in 60, so you can make it slow, or 120. The higher the number, the more open your aperture of your lens is going to have to be as well, okay? Because the faster the shutter is going in front of the faster the shutter is going in front of the frame, the more light it's going to take. So like do this right here. All right? Take your hand and do like this. If you can see, if you pass over your eyes, you can see how much your hand can affect the light that goes into your eyes. All right? So you may feel stupid doing this. I do. but it simulates how it looks, So that's all I have for today's lesson. We'll see you again in the next lesson. Happy filming, guys. Remember, the key to mastering frame rates is to practice and experiment. So go out there and start filming. See you guys.